In this video, we'll be taking a look at all today's NCAAB matchups, and I'll break them all down with free winning picks so you can bet smarter and win bigger. But first, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you get our picks the second they drop. Because when the lines move, the early birds cash in. And if you want the full Winning Sport Picks experience, head over to wspicks.com and check out our VIP packages, or grab a free consultation with one of our professional sports consultants for the sharpest edge you'll find anywhere. That's where the real plays live. We are your bookmaker's worst nightmare. These are the games we're hammering, the ones the books can't afford you to bet. This is Winning Sport Picks. The free picks are about to drop, and they're coming in hot. We begin with East Carolina versus Michigan State, where East Carolina walks in catching 22.5 while Michigan State is laying 22.5. Games like this are always psychological traps. The public loves laying a giant number with the brand name powerhouse, but these matchups tend to get sloppy the moment rotations stretch and tempo fluctuates. East Carolina usually slows games down and tries to grind possessions, which naturally makes massive margins harder to maintain unless the favorite forces turnovers early. Michigan State will have stretches where they overwhelm, but they also go through long plateaus where they trade baskets instead of stacking separation. When you have this kind of gap, the risk of a backdoor cover skyrockets late because the favorite often empties the bench. I'm taking East Carolina plus 22.5 and leaning under 144.5 as the more stable angle. Next up is Iowa State versus Creighton, with Iowa State laying 8 and Creighton catching 9. These two create a classic clash of tempo and discipline. Iowa State is strongest when they force long, bruising, half-court sequences, while Creighton thrives when games loosen and possessions multiply. Early momentum matters heavily here because Iowa State tends to suffocate teams once they control pace. But Creighton covers numbers like this by staying patient and valuing possessions, especially as underdogs. When the line sits in no man's land around 8 or 9, the dog has more paths to sneak inside the number than the favorite has paths to completely pull away. I'm taking Creighton plus 9 and leaning under 150.5. Rolling into Baylor versus St. John's, Baylor enters catching 5 while St. John's lays 4. Expect swings. St. John's plays with pace spikes that can either blow a game open or leave them vulnerable to runs the other way. Baylor, as a road dog, typically thrives when opponents take risks. They keep games closer than expected by slowing down momentum after every surge. With a short line like this, the value sits on the team that handles volatility better, and Baylor tends to respond well in tight possessions. I'm grabbing Baylor plus 5 and riding the over 162.5 with the expectation of pace taking over late. We move to St. Bonaventure versus North Carolina, with the Bonnies catching 10 and the Tar Heels laying 10. North Carolina at home can bury teams early, but they also have a long history of letting opponents stay within shouting distance when pacing gets uneven. St. Bonaventure generally plays structured and methodical, which often forces favorites to sustain discipline for a full 40 minutes. Double-digit favorites fail to cover more often than the public realizes, especially when the dog can limit possessions. I'm taking St. Bonaventure plus 10 and leaning under 152.5. Now Tennessee versus Houston, where Tennessee walks in catching 3 and Houston is laying 3. This is one of those matchups where the line tells you everything. It's tight, it's sharp, and the books expect a grind. Houston's defensive intensity can flatten opponents early, but Tennessee tends to respond well in these slow tactical battles. Close spreads often come down to who controls tempo across the final 5 minutes, and Tennessee as a dog has historically punched above expectation in these exact environments. I'm taking Tennessee plus 3 and leaning under 134.5. Next is Kansas State versus Indiana, with Kansas State catching 8 and Indiana laying 8. Indiana is powerful at home but inconsistent at finishing margins, while Kansas State often drags high expectation opponents into awkward scoring droughts. When dogs can generate low variance scoring, 8 becomes a very reachable number. It allows for small runs to create big leverage. I'm riding Kansas State plus 8 and leaning over 156. Moving into Michigan versus Auburn, Michigan lays 3 while Auburn catches 4. Michigan plays best when games stay structured. Auburn thrives when games open up. Favorites in this range frequently get squeezed because the market overreacts to brand names and undervalues volatility. Auburn's ability to create pace spikes gives them multiple paths to stay inside this number and potentially push late. I'm taking Auburn +4 and leaning over 158.5. And finally, Maryland versus Gonzaga, with Maryland catching 13.5 and Gonzaga laying 13.5. Gonzaga can absolutely blow teams out, but they've also shown a tendency to trade baskets for long stretches before pulling away late, which works against covering large spreads. Maryland usually plays up to competition, especially as a big underdog, and they can limit possessions enough to make 13.5 feel inflated. I'm taking Maryland +13.5 and leaning under 155.5. Now listen to me, those are the free picks, but the one game I am unloading on tonight, the game that's going to crush your bookie's soul, that's the VIP play of the day at WSPicks.com. This is the nuke, the hammer, the max bet, the one play I've circled, the game that will bury your bookmaker 6 feet under. When it hits, and it will, your bookie is going to need a doctor, a lawyer, and maybe even a priest. If you want to ride with me on the biggest bet of the day, get to WSPicks.com right now. For the recap, here are all the picks we're rolling with. East Carolina +22.5 with the under, Creighton +9 with the under, Baylor +5 with the over, St. Bonaventure +10 with the under, Tennessee +3 with the under, Kansas State +8 with the over, Auburn +4 with the over, Maryland +13.5 with the under. That's 8 matchups, 8 free winners, all locked in. This is Winning Sport Picks, where we don't just bet, we bury bookmakers. Smash that subscribe button, drop your favorite plays in the comments, and hammer that like button like you're hammering your bookie into the dirt. We're cashing, we're dominating, and tonight we're dancing on the grave of your bookmaker. Let's go!